The day Maya Chun walked into the Riverside Music Academy, she had no idea her life was about to change forever. She was only 7 years old, a quiet girl with big curious eyes and hair that her mother always tied into 2 neat braids. She wore a pale blue dress that day, one her grandmother had bought from a second-hand store and carefully ironed the night before. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, and Maya thought it was beautiful. Her mother held her hand tightly as they walked up the steps of the old brick building. The academy was located in the nicest part of town, surrounded by tall oak trees and expensive houses with perfectly trimmed lawns. Maya had never been to this neighborhood before. Everything looked so different from the small apartment, where she lived with her mother and grandmother on the other side of the city. Inside, the academy smelled like polished wood and something. Floral, maybe air freshener, or maybe just the scent of money. The floors were shiny, and framed photographs of young musicians lined the walls. Some of them were shaking hands with famous people. Others were holding trophies and certificates. Maya stared at these pictures with wide eyes, wondering if she would ever be good enough to have her photo on a wall like this. Her mother spoke quietly to a woman at the front desk, filling out forms and nodding along to whatever the woman was saying. Maya could tell her mother was nervous. She kept smoothing down her work uniform, the one from the diner where she worked long shifts almost every day. She had taken time off just to bring Maya here today, something that would cost her part of the week's pay. The community scholarship program was the only reason they could even think about music lessons. A teacher at Maya's school had heard her humming during lunch one day and asked if she played any instruments. When Maya explained that she taught herself a little piano on an old keyboard at home, the teacher's eyes had lit up. She told Maya about a program that helped kids from families who couldn't afford lessons. All Maya had to do was pass a simple audition, and if she showed enough promise, she could study at one of the best music academies in the city for free. Maya had practiced for weeks on her grandmother's old keyboard. It was a sad little thing, really. 3 of the keys didn't work at all, and there was a long crack running down the middle where it had been dropped years ago. But to Maya, it was magic. She would sit in front of it for hours, pressing the keys gently, listening to the sounds they made. She learned by watching videos on the old family computer when it worked, and by borrowing books from the library when it didn't. Nobody had ever shown her proper technique or taught her to read sheet music the right way. She just figured things out on her own, one note at a time. Her grandmother would sit nearby while she practiced, closing her eyes and nodding along to the music. Sometimes, when Maya played something particularly beautiful, her grandmother would get very quiet and wipe at the corners of her eyes. She never explained why, but Maya understood somehow. Music meant something deep to her grandmother, something from long ago that she rarely talked about. The audition had been terrifying. Maya remembered walking into a room with a shiny black piano that was bigger than anything she had ever seen. A panel of 3 adults sat behind a table, watching her with serious expressions. Her hands had been shaking so badly that she almost couldn't place them on the keys. But the moment she started to play, something strange happened. The fear melted away. It was just her and the music, and nothing else mattered. She must have done something right, because 2 weeks later, a letter arrived saying she had been accepted into the program. Her mother had cried when she read it. Her grandmother had held the letter like it was made of gold. And Maya had felt something she had never quite felt before, a sense that maybe she was special in some small way. Now here she was, standing in the hallway of the Riverside Music Academy on her first day as a real student. Other children were arriving too, dropped off by parents driving fancy cars. Maya watched a girl her age step out of a sleek silver vehicle, carrying a leather music bag with gold buckles. The girl wore a crisp white blouse and a plaid skirt that looked brand new. She didn't even glance at Maya as she walked past. Maya looked down at her own belongings. Her sheet music was tucked into a plastic grocery bag because she didn't own a proper folder. Her pencil case was the same one she used for school, covered in cartoon stickers that were starting to peel off. She suddenly felt very small and very out of place. Her mother squeezed her hand one more time before she had to leave for work. She told Maya to do her best, to be polite, and to remember that she was just as good as anyone else in that building. Maya nodded, trying to believe it. A few minutes. Later, all the new students were gathered in the main studio. It was a beautiful room with high ceilings and tall windows that let in streams of afternoon sunlight. A grand piano sat in the center, gleaming like something from a dream. Maya had to stop herself from walking over and touching it. The instructor walked in, and the room immediately went silent. Her name was Mrs. Hargrove. She was a tall, thin woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a tight bun. She wore a dark gray dress and simple pearl earrings, and she moved with a kind of stiff elegance that made Maya think of old black-and-white movies. Her face was hard to read. Not unkind, exactly, but not warm either. She looked at the children, the way someone might look at items in a store, deciding which ones were worth her attention. Mrs. Hargrove began by welcoming everyone to the academy. She talked about the history of the program, the famous musicians who had studied here, and the level of dedication she expected from each student. Her voice was sharp and precise, like the clicking of a metronome. Then she asked each child to introduce themselves and share a bit about their musical background. One by one, the children stood up and spoke. One boy talked about the Steinway piano his parents had bought him for his 5th birthday. A girl mentioned her private lessons with a teacher who used to play for the symphony orchestra. Another child described summers spent at music camps in Europe. Maya listened to all of this with a sinking feeling in her stomach. These kids had everything. They had expensive instruments and private teachers and parents who could give them every advantage. What did she have? A cracked keyboard with missing keys and YouTube videos. When it was her turn, Maya stood up slowly. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. She told them her name and said that she had taught herself to play using library books and videos online. She explained that she didn't have a real piano at home, just an old keyboard. The room was very quiet. A few of the other children exchanged glances. One girl whispered something to her friend, and they both giggled softly. Mrs. Hargrove looked at Maya for a long moment. Then she let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a warm laugh, or even a real laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel foolish. "Well," Mrs. Hargrove said, her eyes still fixed on Maya with something cold in them, "I suppose we'll see how long you last." Some of the other children laughed too, taking their cue from the teacher. Maya felt her face grow hot. She sat back down and stared at her hands in her lap, blinking hard to keep the tears from coming. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. She had only told the truth. But somehow, in this beautiful room full of beautiful people, the truth had made her a target. That was the moment Maya realized something important. This place was not going to be easy, and the woman standing at the front of the room was not going to be on her side. But giving up was not something Maya knew how to do. She had come too far, and her family had sacrificed too much. If Mrs. Hargrove wanted to see how long she would last, then Maya would show her. She would last longer than anyone expected. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Maya's young life. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, she would take 2 buses across town to reach the Riverside Music Academy. She would arrive with her sheet music still tucked into that same grocery bag, her shoes a little scuffed, her clothes clean, but clearly not expensive. And every time she walked through those doors, she felt the weight of being different. Mrs. Hargrove had a way of making Maya feel invisible and painfully visible at the same time. During lessons, she would often act as if Maya wasn't even in the room. She would praise other students warmly, complimenting their technique or their expression. She would lean over their shoulders and offer gentle corrections, speaking in a soft, encouraging tone. But when it came to Maya, everything changed. If Maya played a piece correctly, Mrs. Hargrove would simply nod and move on without a word. But if Maya made even the smallest mistake, the teacher would stop everything. She would hold up her hand dramatically and make a face like she had just tasted something bitter. Then she would turn to the rest of the class and shake her head slowly. "This is what happens," she would say, "when students try to run before they can walk. When they skip the fundamentals. When they think watching videos on the internet is the same as real training." The other children would sit there quietly, some of them looking uncomfortable, others trying not to smile. Maya would feel her cheeks burning as she stared at the piano keys, wishing she could disappear into them. God, it wasn't just the criticism that hurt. It was the way Mrs. Hargrove delivered it. She never yelled or raised her voice. That might have been easier to handle. Instead, she used a calm, almost bored tone that made Maya feel like she wasn't even worth getting angry at, like she was simply beneath everyone else in the room. One afternoon, Mrs. Hargrove stopped Maya in the middle of a piece and walked over to where she was sitting. She stood there for a moment, looking down at Maya's hands on the keys. "Your posture is all wrong," she said flatly. "Your wrists are too low. Your fingers are collapsing. Did anyone ever teach you how to sit at a piano properly?" Maya shook her head quietly. She wanted to explain that no one had ever taught her anything, that she had learned everything on her own from whatever resources she could find. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, and her eyes were starting to sting. Mrs. Hargrove sighed like Maya was a problem she was tired of dealing with. "I suppose that's what we get with these scholarship cases," she muttered, just loud enough for a few nearby students to hear. Maya didn't respond. She just adjusted her posture as best she could and waited for the lesson to continue. At home, things were different. Her mother worked double shifts at the diner most days, leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. They didn't get to spend much time together, but whenever they did, her mother would ask about the academy. Maya would smile and say everything was fine. She would talk about the beautiful grand piano and the big windows and the fancy studio. She never mentioned Mrs. Hargrove or the way the other kids sometimes laughed when she made mistakes. Her mother had enough to worry about. Bills were always piling up on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator was often half empty by the end of the week. Some nights, Maya could hear her mother crying softly in her bedroom when she thought no one was listening. Maya didn't want to add to that burden, so she kept the hard parts of her day locked inside and pretended everything was okay. Her grandmother was harder to fool. She was a sharp old woman with wise eyes that seemed to see right through people. She had lived a long life full of struggles, and she knew what it looked like when someone was carrying a heavy weight. One evening, after Maya had been unusually quiet during dinner, her grandmother pulled her aside. They sat together on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at the city lights in the distance. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then her grandmother spoke. "You don't have to tell me what's wrong," she said gently, "but I want you to know that I see you. And whatever is happening, you are stronger than it." Maya didn't cry. She had gotten good at holding back tears. But something about her grandmother's words loosened the knot in her chest just a little. Despite everything, Maya never stopped practicing. Every night after finishing her homework, she would sit in front of her grandmother's old keyboard and play until her fingers ached. She worked on the pieces Mrs. Hargrove assigned, going over them again and again until she could play them in her sleep. She knew her instrument was broken and limited, but she didn't let that stop her. When she reached the keys that didn't work, she would press them anyway, hearing the missing notes in her head and trusting that she was getting it right. Sometimes she would play for hours without realizing it. The world outside would go dark, the apartment would grow quiet, and still she would keep going. Music was the one place where she felt free. When she was playing, she wasn't the poor girl with the grocery bag and the second-hand dress. She was just a person making something beautiful. One day in early spring, Mrs. Hargrove made an announcement that sent a ripple of excitement through the class. The Academy would be hosting its annual spring recital in 2 months. Parents, donors, and special guests would attend. There would even be a professor from the university's music department coming to watch. It was a big event, the kind of thing that could open doors for young musicians. Each student would be assigned a piece to perform. Mrs. Hargrove began calling out names and titles, matching students with compositions that suited their abilities. Some children got complex classical pieces by famous composers. Others got challenging modern works that would impress the audience. When she finally got to Maya's name, the teacher paused. She looked at her clipboard for a moment, then looked up with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maya," she said slowly, "I've given this some thought, and I've decided to assign you something simple, something that won't overwhelm you." She handed Maya a thin sheet of paper. On it was printed a basic nursery rhyme, the kind of song that toddlers learn to plunk out with one finger. It was called "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." A few students giggled. Maya heard someone whisper, "Isn't that for babies?" Mrs. Hargrove ignored them. She looked at Maya with that same cold, bored expression and said, "This should be more your speed. I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself in front of our guests." Maya took the paper without a word. Her hands were steady, but inside she felt like something was breaking. All those weeks of hard work, all those hours of practice, and this was what the teacher thought of her. A nursery rhyme, a baby song, a joke. She walked back to her seat and sat down quietly. The other students were already chattering about their own pieces, excited about the recital and the chance to show off their skills. No one looked at Maya. No one said anything to make her feel better. That night, Maya went home and sat on her bed for a long time. She held the sheet music in her hands, staring at the simple notes of the nursery rhyme. Part of her wanted to crumple it up and throw it away. Part of her wanted to quit entirely, to never go back to that academy and never see Mrs. Hargrove's face again. But there was another part of her, too. A quiet, stubborn part that refused to be crushed. It was the same part that had taught itself piano on a broken keyboard. The same part that had walked into that audition with shaking hands and played anyway. The same part that kept going even when everything felt impossible. Maya didn't know what she was going to do yet. But she knew one thing for certain. She was not going to let this woman break her. Maya didn't tell her mother about the nursery rhyme. She didn't want to see the hurt in her eyes or watch her try to find comforting words for a situation that had no easy comfort. But her grandmother was different. Her grandmother had a way of knowing things without being told, and that night, she found Maya sitting alone in the corner of their small living room. Staring at the sheet music with empty eyes, her grandmother sat down beside her slowly, the way old bones do when they've carried too many years. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at the paper in Maya's hands, reading the title of the song printed at the top. Then she let out a long, quiet breath. "Ah," she said softly. "So that's how it is." Maya nodded. She still couldn't bring herself to speak. If she opened her mouth, she was afraid everything would come pouring out. All the anger and shame and confusion she had been holding inside for weeks. Her grandmother reached over and gently took the sheet music from her hands. She studied it for a moment, then set it aside on the coffee table like it was nothing important. Because to her, it wasn't. "Let me tell you something," her grandmother said, turning to face Maya fully. "A long time ago, when I was young, I wanted to be a pianist." "Did you know that?" Maya looked up surprised. Her grandmother rarely talked about her past. She knew bits and pieces, that her grandmother had grown up poor in a small village, that she had come to this country with almost nothing. That life had been hard in ways Maya couldn't fully understand. But she had never heard anything about music. Her grandmother smiled, but it was a sad smile, full of old memories. "I love the piano more than anything in the world. I used to walk 3 miles to the next village, just to practice on an old piano in the church. The priest let me play for 1 hour every Sunday after the service. 1 hour a week. That was all I had." She paused, her eyes looking at something far away. "I got good. Very good. People started to notice. A teacher from the city heard me play once and said I had real talent. He said if I could find a way to study properly, I could have a future in music." "What happened?" Maya asked quietly. Her grandmother's smile faded. "Life happened. My family needed me to work. There was no money for lessons or schools. I had to choose between my dreams and helping my mother and brothers survive. So I made my choice." She reached out and took Maya's small hands in her wrinkled ones. "I never got my chance, Maya. The world took it from me before I could even try. But you have a chance. A real one. And I will not let anyone take it from you." Maya felt tears building behind her eyes. "But what can I do?" She gave me a baby song. "Everyone is going to laugh at me." Her grandmother squeezed her hands tightly. "And give them something they will never forget." That night, her grandmother did something she had never done before. She went to the old wooden chest in her bedroom, the one she kept locked and never opened. Maya watched from the doorway as she lifted the lid and carefully removed something wrapped in faded cloth. It was a book. Old and worn, with yellowed pages and a cracked spine. On the cover, in elegant gold letters, were the words Chopin, Selected Works. Her grandmother held it like it was made of something precious. "This book has been with me for over 50 years, she said. "It was a gift from that teacher I told you about. He gave it to me the day I told him I couldn't continue. He said maybe one day I would find a use for it." She opened the book slowly and turned to a page somewhere in the middle. There, printed in neat black notes, was a piece called Ballade No. 1 in G minor. "This," her grandmother said, "is one of the most beautiful and difficult pieces ever written for piano. It takes years for most people to master. It requires perfect technique, deep emotion, and complete control." Maya looked at the dense clusters of notes covering the pages. It looked impossible. It looked like something only a genius could play. "I can't learn that," she whispered. "Not in 2 months. Not ever." Her grandmother closed the book and placed it in Maya's hands. "You taught yourself to play on a broken keyboard with missing keys. You learned from library books and videos. You walked into an audition with no training and earned a place at that academy. Do not tell me what you cannot do." Something shifted inside Maya at that moment. It was like a small flame being lit in a dark room. She didn't know if she could really learn this piece. But for the first time since Mrs. Hargrove had handed her that nursery rhyme, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. The next day, her grandmother made some phone calls. One of them was to an old friend from church, a kind woman whose children had grown up and moved away. This woman had an electronic keyboard sitting unused in her garage, a real one with all the keys working and a proper stand. She was happy to lend it to Maya for as long as she needed. That evening, Maya sat in front of the borrowed keyboard with her grandmother's Chopin book open in front of her. She placed her fingers on the keys and played the first few notes of the ballade. It sounded terrible. Her timing was off, her fingers stumbled, and she couldn't make sense of the complicated rhythms. She tried again and failed again. And again, and again. But she didn't stop. Every night for the next 2 months, Maya lived a double life. At the academy, she practiced her nursery rhyme like a good, obedient student. She played it simply and correctly, never showing any sign of what she was really capable of. When Mrs. Hargrove walked past her during practice sessions, Maya kept her head down and her playing small. She became invisible on purpose, but at home she transformed. She would practice the chopin piece for 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours a night. Her fingers blistered and then hardened. Her back ached from sitting so long. Some nights she got so frustrated that she wanted to slam the keyboard shut and never touch it again. On those nights, her grandmother would bring her a cup of warm tea and sit beside her without saying a word. Just being there, just believing in her. Slowly, something began to happen. The impossible notes started to make sense. The complicated rhythms began to feel natural. Maya's small hands, which had once seemed too weak for such a demanding piece, grew stronger and more confident. She started to hear the music the way Chopin must have heard it when he wrote it, full of longing and power and heartbreak. She wasn't just learning the notes. She was learning the soul of the piece. Her grandmother listened to her practice every night. And as the weeks passed, Maya noticed something changing in the old woman's face. The sadness that always seemed to live behind her eyes began to lift. Sometimes, when Maya played a particularly beautiful passage, her grandmother would close her eyes and smile like she was somewhere else entirely. Like she was that young girl again, walking 3 miles to play piano in a village church. One night, about a week before the recital, Maya played the entire ballade from beginning to end without a single mistake. When the last note faded into silence, she looked up to find her grandmother crying. "That teacher was right about me," her grandmother said through her tears. "I did find a use for that book. I was saving it for you." Maya got up and hugged her grandmother tightly. They stayed like that for a long time, 2 generations of dreamers holding on to each other in a small apartment that suddenly felt full of hope. The recital was only days away now. Maya had done everything she could to prepare. She had practiced until her whole body knew the music by heart. She had kept her secret hidden from Mrs. Hargrove and everyone else at the academy. Now, all she had to do was wait for her moment. And when it came, she was going to make sure no one would ever underestimate her again. The morning of the recital arrived with bright sunshine and a sky so blue it almost didn't seem real. Maya woke up before her alarm, her stomach tight with nerves. She lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, going over the notes of the Chopin piece in her mind. Her fingers moved slightly under the blanket, pressing invisible keys. Her mother had taken the day off work, something she almost never did. She had ironed Maya's best dress the night before, a simple white one with small blue flowers that her grandmother had sewn by hand. It wasn't fancy like the clothes the other children would be wearing, but it was made with love, and Maya thought that mattered more. At breakfast, no one said much. Her mother kept looking at her with proud, worried eyes. Her grandmother sat quietly, drinking her tea, but Maya could see her hands trembling slightly. They all knew how important this day was. They all knew what was at stake. Before they left the apartment, her grandmother pulled Maya aside. She pressed something small and cool into Maya's palm. It was a tiny silver pin in the shape of a piano, old and slightly tarnished. "This was mine," her grandmother said softly. "I wore it the day I played for that teacher from the city, the day he told me I had talent. I want you to wear it today." Maya looked at the little pin, feeling the weight of all the years it carried. She pinned it carefully to her dress, right over her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Her grandmother cupped her face in both hands and looked deep into her eyes. "Remember who you are today. Not the girl they tried to make you feel like. The girl who taught herself to fly. The recital was being held in the Academy's main auditorium, a grand space with velvet seats and a high ceiling painted with scenes of angels playing instruments. Maya had never been inside this room before. Students usually practiced in the smaller studios. This space was reserved for special occasions. When Maya and her family arrived, the auditorium was already filling up with people. Parents in expensive clothes chatted with each other near the entrance. Donors and board members stood in small groups, holding glasses of sparkling water. Near the front row, Maya spotted a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes, wearing a dark blazer. Someone whispered that she was Dr. Chun, a famous music professor from the university. She had come specifically to watch the performances and scout for talented young musicians. Maya felt her heart beat faster. This was really happening. Mrs. Hargrove stood near the stage, dressed in a long black gown that made her look even more severe than usual. She was greeting parents with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, accepting compliments about the academy and the wonderful program she had built. When she saw Maya walk in, her gaze lingered for just a moment. There was something in her expression, a flicker of satisfaction, like she was looking forward to watching Maya embarrass herself. Maya looked away and found seats for her mother and grandmother near the middle of the auditorium. She squeezed her grandmother's hand one more time before heading backstage to join the other students. The backstage area was buzzing with nervous energy. Children in fancy outfits were warming up, running through scales and tricky passages. Some parents had hired accompanists to help their kids prepare. Others had brought expensive sheet music bound in leather folders. Maya stood in the corner with her grocery bag, trying to stay calm. One of the other girls, the one who had arrived in the silver car on Maya's first day, walked past and glanced at her. "Nervous about your little song?" she asked with a smirk. "Don't worry. It's so short. You'll be done before anyone notices." Maya didn't respond. She just smiled politely and turned away. "Let them think what they want," she told herself. "They'll see soon enough." The recital began promptly at 2:00. Mrs. Hargrove walked onto the stage and welcomed everyone with a speech about excellence and dedication and the bright futures of her students. She talked about the Academy's history and its famous alumni. She thanked the donors for their generous support. She never once mentioned the scholarship program or the students who came from less privileged backgrounds. Then the performances started, one by one. Children walked onto the stage and took their places at the grand piano. They played Mozart and Beethoven and Bach. They played with technical precision and careful emotion. The audience clapped politely after each piece, and Mrs. Hargrove beamed with pride. Maya watched from the wings, her stomach churning. Some of the performances were genuinely impressive. These kids had been trained by the best teachers money could buy. They had practiced on instruments worth more than Maya's entire apartment. How could she possibly compete with that? But then she remembered her grandmother's words. She remembered the old Chopin book and the little silver pin over her heart. She remembered all those nights of practice, all those hours of struggle, all those moments when she wanted to give up but didn't. She wasn't here to compete. She was here to show them who she really was. The afternoon wore on. Student after student performed, and the audience grew more relaxed, settling into their seats and whispering comments to each other. Maya noticed that Dr. Chun, the university professor, was taking notes on a small pad. She wondered what the woman was writing, whose names were going on her list of promising talents. Finally, Mrs. Hargrove returned to the stage with a thin smile. "And now," she announced, "our final performer of the afternoon. Before we break for refreshments, we have one more student." She paused, and Maya could swear she saw amusement in the teacher's eyes. "Please welcome Maya Chun, who will be playing a selection for us." The applause was polite but brief. Maya heard someone in the audience murmur something about the scholarship girl. She took a deep breath and walked out onto the stage. The grand piano sat in the center, gleaming under the bright lights. It was the most beautiful instrument Maya had ever seen up close. She had only touched it a few times during group lessons, never for more than a minute or two. Now it was hers, at least for the next few moments. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it carefully. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling their smooth coolness. The auditorium was silent. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting. She glanced toward the audience and found her mother and grandmother sitting together. Her mother's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Her grandmother sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Maya with absolute faith. Maya turned back to the piano. She began to play. The first notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star floated through the auditorium. They were soft and sweet, played with simple clarity. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Mrs. Hargrove nodded with a satisfied expression, already turning to say something to one of the donors beside her. Maya played the nursery rhyme through once, exactly as written. Simple, basic, childish, and then something changed, without stopping. Without even pausing to take a breath, Maya let the final note of the nursery rhyme melt into something else. Her fingers shifted position. Her posture straightened. And the opening melody of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor began to fill the room. The effect was immediate. Mrs. Hargrove's head snapped back toward the stage. The donors stopped their whispering. Dr. Chun leaned forward in her seat, her pen frozen in midair. Maya played on, her small hands moving across the keys with a power and grace that seemed impossible for a child her age. The music swelled and dipped, carrying waves of emotion that washed over the stunned audience. It was haunting and beautiful and raw, filled with all the longing and pain and hope that Maya had poured into it during those long nights of secret practice. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. She was somewhere else now, somewhere deep inside the music, where nothing could hurt her and nothing could hold her back. The auditorium had gone completely still. No one moved. No one whispered. No one even seemed to breathe, and Maya kept playing. The music poured out of Maya like water breaking through a dam. Every note she played carried a piece of her story. The loneliness of being different, the sting of cruel words, the weight of watching her mother work until her feet ached, the quiet strength of her grandmother's love. It was all there, woven into the melody, rising and falling like the breath of something alive. Her fingers danced across the keys with a confidence that surprised even her. The countless hours of practice had become part of her muscle memory, freeing her mind to feel the music instead of just play it. She leaned into the powerful sections, letting the notes thunder through the auditorium. She softened during the tender passages, drawing the audience in closer, making them hold their breath. In the middle section of the ballade, there was a part that had given her trouble for weeks. It required her hands to stretch in ways that seemed almost impossible for someone her size. During practice, she had failed this section dozens of times. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, her hands found exactly where they needed to be. The notes rang out clear and true, each one landing perfectly. Maya didn't notice the tears streaming down her mother's face in the audience. She didn't see her grandmother sitting with her eyes closed, lips moving silently as if in prayer. She didn't see Dr. Chun gripping the armrests of her seat, completely transfixed. And she certainly didn't see Mrs. Hargrove standing frozen at the side of the stage, her face drained of all color. All Maya knew was the music. All she felt was the story she was telling through her fingers. The final section of the ballade built toward its climax. The notes came faster, more intense, layering on top of each other in cascading waves of sound. Maya's whole body moved with the rhythm, swaying slightly as she poured every last drop of emotion into the keys. The auditorium seemed to vibrate with the power of it. And then the ending. 4 bold chords struck with precision and finality. The last note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity, slowly fading into silence. Maya lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest in her lap. She sat very still, suddenly aware of how hard her heart was pounding. The auditorium was completely silent. For one terrifying moment, she thought she had done something wrong. Maybe they hadn't liked it. Maybe they were angry that she hadn't played her assigned piece. Then someone started clapping. It was Dr. Chun. She rose from her seat in the front row, her hands coming together in firm, deliberate applause. A second later, Maya's mother stood up too, tears still wet on her cheeks. Then her grandmother. Then the people sitting near them. Then more. And more. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause was deafening, washing over Maya in waves. People were cheering. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were turning to each other with expressions of disbelief, asking if they had really just witnessed what they thought they had witnessed. A 7-year-old girl. A scholarship student. A child who had taught herself piano on a broken keyboard. She had just performed one of the most difficult pieces in classical music, and she had performed it beautifully. Maya finally looked up. She saw the standing ovation and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pain, something else. Something warm and bright that she didn't have a name for. She had spent so many months feeling small and worthless. Now, for the first time, she felt seen. She stood up slowly and gave a small bow, the way she had seen performers do in videos. The applause continued. People were still on their feet. Dr. Chun was smiling widely, already making her way toward the side of the stage. Backstage, the other students stood in stunned silence. The girl who had mocked Maya earlier was staring at her with her mouth hanging open. No one said a word as Maya walked past them, still trembling slightly from the rush of adrenaline. Mrs. Hargrove was waiting near the curtain. Her face was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at Maya with an expression that was hard to read. There was shock in her eyes, certainly. But there was something else too. Something that looked almost like fear. That was not your assigned piece, she said stiffly. Maya met her gaze without flinching. No, she said quietly. It wasn't. Before Mrs. Hargrove could respond, Dr. Chun appeared beside them. She placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder and smiled down at her with genuine warmth. That was extraordinary, the professor said. I've been teaching music for over 30 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've heard a performance that moved me like that, especially from someone so young. Mrs. Hargrove tried to step in. Dr. Chun, I should mention that Maya is one of our scholarship students. She's still developing her skills, and I've been working closely with her to address some fundamental gaps in her training. Dr. Chun raised an eyebrow. Is that so? She looked at Maya. Tell me, who is your piano teacher? Who prepared you for this performance? Maya hesitated. She could feel Mrs. Hargrove's eyes boring into her, silently warning her to play along. But she was done pretending. She was done being invisible. I taught myself, Maya said clearly. I learned from library books and videos online. I practiced at home on a borrowed keyboard. My grandmother gave me the music and believed in me when no one else did. Dr. Chun's expression shifted. She looked at Mrs. Hargrove for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Then she turned back to Maya. I run a youth program at the university for exceptionally gifted young musicians. Full scholarship, private lessons with some of the best teachers in the country, performance opportunities, everything you need to develop your talent properly. She paused. I would like to offer you a place in that program, if you're interested." Maya couldn't speak. She felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Just hours ago, she had been the girl with the grocery bag and the baby song. Now one of the most respected music professors in the region was offering her a future. Her mother and grandmother had made their way backstage by now. Her mother was crying openly, not even trying to hide it anymore. Her grandmother stood behind her, one hand pressed to her heart, the little silver piano pin that Maya had returned to her catching the light. "Yes," Maya finally managed to say. "Yes, I'm interested." "Thank you." Dr. Chun smiled. "Don't thank me. You earned this yourself." Later that evening, after the crowds had gone and the auditorium had emptied, Maya sat alone on the stage. The grand piano was still there, silent now, waiting for its next performer. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them, just feeling their smooth surface. Her grandmother came to sit beside her. They didn't speak for a while. They just sat together in the quiet, letting the weight of the day settle around them. "You know," her grandmother finally said, "I spent my whole life wondering what might have been. What if I had gotten my chance? What if things had been different?" She turned to look at Maya, her eyes shining. "Now I know. My chance was you." Maya leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," her grandmother said softly. "You just wouldn't have had anyone to share it with." They sat there together as the last light of the day faded through the tall windows. Two dreamers, two generations, connected by music and love and the stubborn refusal to give up. Somewhere out there, Maya knew, Mrs. Hargrove was probably already forgetting about her, moving on to the next student, the next recital, the next opportunity to decide who was worthy and who wasn't. But Maya would never forget this day. The day she stopped letting others define her. The day she discovered that the best answer to cruelty wasn't anger or revenge. It was excellence. And she was just getting started.